Guitar Tone Junkies, what's up? It's Pete Thorn. Welcome to my studio. Hey, I'm here today to show you the KOMET AMBIKAB Jr. There it is down there on the bottom below my PT15 amp and PT15 212 cab. AMBIKAB Jr. is down there. This is the rig that I used to create all the guitar tones on that track at the beginning of the video. The AMBIKAB Jr. is a stereo-powered cabinet with two 10-inch Neo speakers in it and a built-in stereo power amplifier, and it allows you to turn any guitar rig into a really straightforward and yet super powerful wet, dry, wet rig. Now, what's wet, dry, wet? There's a number of different ways to do wet, dry, wet rigs, but basically it's a way that you can add stereo effects to any guitar rig while keeping the core dry tone of that rig intact. So let's say you've got a deluxe reverb or even a Marshall Plexi or something like that. There's no effects loops on those amplifiers. And if you turn them up, plugging effects into the front of them can sound real messy and kind of splatty and just out of control. So wet, dry, wet was something that the guitar tone gurus came up with many years ago in order to add effects to those great vintage amplifiers and keep the core dry tone intact of those amps, and yet add in some cool stuff like pitch shifting, delay, chorusing, reverb. But it used to be you would need a mixer, you would need separate cabinets, separate power amps to do all this kind of stuff. With the AMBIKAB Jr., it's all enclosed in one cabinet. So it makes for a super easy way to add lush stereo effects to everything from vintage combos through to high power 100-watt vintage heads like Hi-Watts and Marshalls, with total independent control over the effects and the core dry sound. So first of all, let me explain how I hooked all this stuff up, and then I'm going to give you some more sound examples here, and maybe it'll spur some ideas in your own mind about how wet, dry, wet, or the KOMET AMBIKAB Jr. could work with your guitar rig. Hooking up the AMBIKAB is really simple. Here's my PT15 head. I'm taking the main speaker output, plugging that into my PT212 cabinet here. I take the second speaker output and run that down here into the AMBIKAB, into the input. Now, you don't have to worry about impedance or anything like that. Just set your head for your main speaker cab's impedance, or if it's a combo, for what it would normally be at. In this case, my speaker cab is 8 ohms. I leave it at 8 ohms. Plug it in down here, and this just takes a tap off of the amp. It's not powering this cabinet. It's just taking a tap in order to send out some signal to the effects. So then you've got an effects send, that's this cable right here. That's going over to my Fractal FM3 that I'm using this video for all the effects. And this is the send level right here. So I turn that up to send some level out to my effects. I take the returns out of the FM3 and I plug them in here left and right into the effect returns. There's a bass cut here, so you can trim out some bass out of your effects. And then there's also a return level here, so that'll affect the overall volume of the effects coming back out of your effect unit. And of course, you can adjust that at the effect unit itself as well. I used my pedal board a little bit for some front-end effects in front of the amplifier, just like compression and drive. So I used the Wampler Mini Ego Comp for the clean sounds, and I used the Ryra muff clone there, as well as that EP pre down there on the end in front of the amp for some fuzz and a little bit of just boost really into the amplifier. And so all that stuff was plugged right into the front. And on my PT15 head, I used obviously the clean channel for the clean sounds, and then channels 2 and 3 for the drive stuff. I mic'd up the dry center cabinet here, my PT212 greenback speaker here with a Lewitt dynamic mic, similar to a 57, and it's pan center. And then down there on the Ambikab Junior, I've got a couple, I think they're called AT450s. They're small diaphragm condenser microphones from Audio-Technica for the wet sound, and those are hard panned left and right for all the parts in the video. So to do all the effects in this video, you're probably asking yourself, what effects was I using? What effect units? I was using this unit from Axe Effects, the FM3. I was able to come up with the presets using the editor for the FM3. You can see I got it up here on the screen. And because this unit lets you do internal parallel paths, I was able to do things like reverb, delay, and pitch shifter all in parallel. So the send coming off the cabinet gets plugged into the FM3, and then the first thing it hits is a volume pedal block. There's the volume pedal right there. That allows me to mix the effects in. Okay, after the volume pedal, you can see here I'm carrying through to a delay, splitting to a reverb as well, and splitting to a pitch shifter. Each of these was mixed 100% wet. And then you simply turn up the output for each effect, depending on how much you want blended into the sound. I put a mixer block right at the end of the chain that allowed me to easily just turn up row 1, row 2, or row 3 here and blend in reverb, delay, pitch shifter. Then I come stereo out of the output to the FM3 back into the Ambikab. Now you might be asking yourself, what if I don't have an Axe Effects? Well, if you got a Helix, or even something like an Eventide H9, or an old school rack effect, something like a PCM 70 or something like that, you can do the same thing. You're just gonna wanna set the effects 100% wet and then blend them in via the output control on the effect. That way, you've only got the wet sound in the Ambikab speakers. For the first part in the track at the beginning of the video, I did a thing I like to do sometimes, which is just on the delay, I've got rotary. So only on the echo repeats do you hear like a pretty intense rotary speaker effect. And I love that sound of having basically like dry guitar, but then Leslie only on delay repeats. It's just like a kind of like a really intense modulated delay, essentially. This shall serve as a little FAQ on wet, dry, wet. What are some other ways to do it? Well, one way to do it is to mic a dry cabinet, take that mic'd signal, run it into a mixer. Some people use like a rack mount mixer for this, like Rain makes them. You take an aux send off of that mic'd up cabinet signal and you run it to your effects. You take the return of that effect back into the mixer, and now you can blend that dry mic'd signal with the effect. This is exactly what you do when you record, when you use an aux send on a console to send out to a reverb or delay. You can then take the stereo output of that mixer and run it right to, let's say, a PA system, or right to a recorder, or even to a set of powered monitors. Okay, this is the way some players like Michael Landau, John Shanks is one I can think of that does this currently. This is the way some guys have done it. But But it requires more stuff. Obviously, you need the mixer. Generally speaking, this is stuff that you would do with a rack mount setup, rack effects. It's a great way to do it, but just you need more stuff. Okay, what about some other ways? Well, you can use something like this. This is a Sir line out box. This goes in between your guitar amp and your guitar speakers. What it does is you just plug the output of the amp in here, take the speaker through, plug that through to your dry cabinet. It takes a tap then off that signal, and you've got a pot here. You turn this up, and that's going to send out the line output here, and you can run this out to some effects. Okay, and once again, this is exactly what the AMBIKAB has built in right here. It has a built-in line out box, takes a tap off the main guitar dry signal, sends it out to the effects, and returns it back into the stereo returns. You can then plug the output of the effects into a power amp and maybe a set of 112 guitar cabinets or something like that. Now you're going to want to run the effects 100% wet once again, and the reason is if you don't, generally speaking, effects are digital. You're going through A to D and D to A conversion. If you've got any dry mixed into the sound, you're going to end up with a phasey kind of comb filtery sound with your dry cabinet. And that's because of the delay that the A to D and D to A conversion of the effects imposes on the signal. Is there a way around that? Yes. You have to use this, take the output into a mixer, and then do what I just said for the mic'd up method, where you're gonna then mix some of the dry signal in, but take a tap off that dry signal using the sends on the mixer, run out to the effects, bring the returns back, and then you can plug the left and right outputs of that mixer into some guitar cabinets. Now you've got dry mixed into those cabinets and the parallel wet signal. This is the way some guitar players like Steve Stevens and Eddie Van Halen do their rigs. So in a way, it's not actually true wet, dry, wet, but it sort of is. You've got your center dry cabinet, and then you've also got outside cabinets that have dry mixed in as well as wet signal. And this is the way, incidentally, I used to do my rig back around 2008, 9, 10, 11. Once again, you need a lot of stuff. You're going to need this, you're going to need a mixer, then you need your external effects, you need external cabinets, external power amp. Which brings us back to the AMBIKAB, because that gives you all that stuff built into one small, under 25-pound enclosure. So as you may have garnered, going wet, dry, wet can get complicated real quick if you use A, multiple devices, and B, if you want to mix dry signal into the wet speakers. So long story short, the easiest way to do a rig like this is just use one effect unit, set it for kill dry or 100% wet. This is why something like an Axe Effects or Helix works great, because it allows you inside to do parallel paths if you want to do like separate reverb and delay, for instance. And don't worry about mixing any dry signal into the wet cabinet. That's the easiest way to do a wet, dry, wet rig. And the AMBIKAB makes it even easier because you've got the power amp, the mixer, and the wet speakers all built into one enclosure. Thanks for watching my video on the KOMET AMBIKAB Jr. This is a terrific product. I think they've actually got a patent pending on this design. I can't think of any other cabinets out there that are like this, that have the built-in mixer, built-in stereo power amp, and that are designed to do a whole wet, dry, wet rig all in one. It's a really, really cool way to add stereo effects to a vintage amplifier like a Marshall Plexi or a combo like a Deluxe Reverb or AC30. And even with a modern amplifier like my PT15, which has an effects loop, there is something really cool about keeping the dry tone in the main guitar speakers totally intact with no A to D conversion or any kind of added delay or any of the kind of like diffusiveness that can happen with the tone when you start adding reverbs and delays in those speakers. Just all the punch is there, and the tone that you know your amplifier can make isn't getting diluted by anything. You can check it out further at the link down in the video description below. Click there, it'll take you to all the info about the AMBIKAB Junior. There's also a big brother to this cabinet that's got dry speakers built into the same cabinet, so you can check that out as well. And all the other great amps from KOMET. I've had a KOMET Concord for well over 10 years now, and I'm a big fan of them. They're a great company. Please hit subscribe if you haven't. Hit the little bell beside the subscribe. You'll get an alert every time I put out a new video. I'll see you soon for more videos. I'm Pete Thorn. Take care.